So I wanted to talk about facing our problems, and specifically facing our emotions, the ones that are difficult to face, and the problems that are difficult to face. And sometimes when a problem is difficult to face, we pretend that we don't have the problem, because that makes it easier to solve, right? If it's not a problem, there's nothing to solve. So I want to read something to you that I read yesterday on the plane on my way to Poland. It's not yesterday for you when you're listening to this. This is about a week in advance, but I think you're going to like this. The biggest obstacle to increasing self-awareness is the tendency to avoid the discomfort that comes from seeing yourself as you really are. You ever have someone tell you something about yourself, or you shouldn't do this, or why do you do that, or it's not good that you said this, or think, and you think, I don't do that, what are you talking about? Why would you say that if someone is saying you do that? Because it's so painful to admit that you do that, because it's a behavior which goes against everything you believe to be right, everything you value. And so you have this concept of yourself that I'm a certain way, and I would never do that, I'm not that kind of person, when in fact you are doing it. And if you can't admit you're doing it, you can't correct it. So that's really difficult, isn't it? Sometimes to face the fact that you're not what you think you are. That's a real letdown for your sense of self. For some of us, it's a letdown for the ego, who has this high idea of who we are. So let me read that again. The biggest obstacle to increasing your self-awareness is the tendency to avoid the discomfort that comes from seeing yourself as you really are. Things you do not think about are off your radar for a reason. They can sting when they surface. So what this means is, maybe you could acknowledge these things, but you don't, because it's so painful to acknowledge, because you feel like a failure. Or you feel like you're becoming the very person that you despise. When you see other people do that, you hate it. You hate them, and now you're doing it yourself, and you don't want to admit it. So it stings, it's painful, so you would rather just pretend you're not like that. And again, the problem in pretending you're not like that is you can't fix it. Avoiding this pain creates problems because it is merely a short-term fix. You'll never be able to manage yourself effectively if you ignore what you need to do to change. Rather than avoiding a feeling, your goal should be to move toward the emotion, into it, and eventually through it. So we've talked about this previously, that the only way out of a problem is through it. You can't run away from it, it doesn't work. And going through it means painful emotions, facing painful emotions, or admitting failures. And that requires strength, that requires humility. But if we want to go back to Godhead, as I always say, it's an expensive process, so you have to be willing to pay. And if chiseling and deflating the false ego so you can be more self-aware is required, then we should be happy to do it, right? We should embrace the pain. If the pain is going to bring us closer to Krishna, then the pain becomes our pleasure. Like Radharani said, Krishna, if my pain brings you pleasure, that makes me happy. So the pain of facing who we are gives us the pleasure of becoming a better person. So don't run away. Even though I know it stings, be self-honest, and that way you can improve yourself. And I would also say, if you can't do this, don't get married. And if you are married, do this. Because if you don't do this, you're making it very hard on your spouse. Because your spouse sees the problem, and if you're in denial of it, it's one of the causes of a bad marriage, to be defensive when someone is pointing out something that they would like you to understand or like you to change. Hare Krishna.